Now how about a useful program? Let's open up the program we had before and extend it a little bit. I'll start by importing a package called random. This is available with the installation of Python and requires nothing more than this line at the top. I'll use the random function to generate some numbers at random. So maybe you call it rnum equals random dot rand range, which will select a random integer from 0 to the number that I specify, but not including that upper number, and then assign that to the value rnum. This notation with the dot indicates that we're using the function randrange, which comes from the package random. We'll talk more about that notation later. Now instead of printing y, we'll print a string representation of that number. So we need to do print str to convert this number into a string. Print str rnum. Okay. Now let's save this and then run it. So Python example1.py. There's a 2. If I press return, a 0, and each time I press return, it gives me another random number. Let's suppose that I wanted to learn the binary representations for these numbers. I'll use Q to quit, and now I'll add something else to the program. Let's add something that prints out the binary representation. So after our if statement, suppose we're not going to close the program. If I type something else, well, then we can use the else keyword to specify what's going to happen. So if I don't type a Q, well then it could go ahead and tell me the binary representation of that number. So it could print, and here I'll use the function called format, and I'll specify the number, rnum, and the way I want it formatted. Format strings are covered in the documentation, but for now it's enough to know that if I type 04b, that'll give me the binary representation with 4 digits, which is appropriate for a number from 0 to 15 inclusive. Okay, now let's save that, and in fact, let's go ahead and save it as, and call it example2. Okay, now Python example2. So here's a 6, and if I hit return, it tells me the binary representation. And here's the binary representation for 13. And if you look closely, the number on the far left is the most significant digit. So 13 is composed of an 8, a 4, no 2's, and a 1. 8 plus 4 plus 1 is 13. So if I think about it that way, then it's easy for me to sort of guess the answer. So there's a 7. So that could be a 1, a 2, and a 4. So 0, 1, 1. And there it is. Here's 15. Well, that's all the numbers. 8 plus 4 plus 2 plus 1. And I got it right. So you can go through and use this as a kind of flashcard program to become familiar with the binary representations of numbers from 0 to 15. Nice. Okay, and still Q exits the program. Now, if we were using this as a flashcard program, something to help us learn, say, words in Japanese or something, well, then we would want to make sure it hits all the names and all the words, rather than going at random. Now, maybe we want the ordering to be random, but supposing we want it to hit every possible number from 0 to 15, how would we do that? Maybe we'll start with a list. So here on the program, I'll just go ahead and make a for loop for I in range 16. And once again, the same way as in rand range, this starts at 0 and it doesn't quite get to the number that you specify. So it'll go from 0 to 15. And each time this little loop runs, I want it to append I to a list. So we'll make a new list called numList, and we'll start it out as an empty brackets. So that is a list of numbers with nothing in it. Then we'll type numList.append to add the element I to numList. So the first time this runs, it'll add a 0, and then a 1, and so on, until it gets up to a list of 16 numbers, 0 to 15. Then I want it to pull a random number out of that list. So I'll make a new variable called rind, meaning the random index. And I'll make it random.randrange, but instead of 16, I'll specify that I want to make it only as long as the length of numList. as I pick items out of this list, it'll get shorter. So if I ask for an index of, say, the 15th number in the list, after I've already moved 6 or 7 numbers, well, it's going to give me an error because that index is not present in the list. Okay, so I've specified the index. Now I can get the number itself by indexing off of the list, which is to say taking an element out of it. You don't have to take an element out in order to get the value, but here we will. So we'll type numList.pop, which simultaneously removes the element and returns its value. So we can get that value into our num. We'll pop the value at the location specified by the index, rind. Okay, now everything else is pretty much the same as before. Let's save and run the program. Okay, so 5, and I can type in 0101. Okay, I got that one right. 0011. Okay, so I can do binary. And as I run this, you'll see there are no repeats. And at some point, it runs out of numbers, and it gives me an error saying empty range for rand range, meaning that it's tried to find the length of a list that has no items in it. And so rand range of 0 is giving me an error. So what I should do is handle that in the program. I should say, if the length of numList is 0, then I should also close the program. Okay. Now we can run the program again, and going through all the 15 numbers, when it gets to the end, it exits. There you go. Quick program, might be useful. See you next time.